Welcome back to another episode of Built and Backed. Joining me today is Sarah Mattina, a strategic communications consultant with nearly a decade of experience across startups, venture capital, and financial communications. She has held in-house roles leading communications at JetBlue Ventures, the National Venture Capital Association, and Southwest Airlines, and has advised founders and funds alike at Edelman Smithfield. As founder of Mattina Media, Sarah partners with her clients on funding announcements, product launches, and executive visibility with a specialty in translating complex offerings into compelling media-ready narratives. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
I'm excited to have you here, especially because you are the first PR guest that we're having. So it'll be so fun to talk more about tech PR and how startups and VC firms can really leverage it. But before we get into that, I'd love to have you start off by sharing more about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, definitely. Well, you did a phenomenal job with the introduction. I always tell folks that I found venture capital and startup comms kind of by accident. So I actually started my career in aviation at Southwest Airlines, and I loved it. It's as great of a company as everybody says. But I wanted to pivot more from an internal comms role into an externally facing role. And that just wasn't possible at that time. And so I started applying and I found myself at JetBlue Airways venture capital arm in San Francisco as the next step. And so what I thought initially was kind of an airline job turned into this VC startup role, both promoting the firm and helping support its portfolio companies. So I led comms there for 3 years, and that's where I really found kind of my passion. And so after JetBlue, of course, was at the National Venture Capital Association, then on to Edelman Smithfield before finally starting my own thing. So really just found a passion for helping people with their passions, which are founders most of the time, whether that's a GP founder or a startup founder.
Oh, I love it. And I also love that you had eventually started your own firm, which is now what you do today. And I'm curious to hear what sparked the inspiration for that, or really what led you to starting it.
Yeah, so I previously worked at Edelman Smithfield and, not always a happy story, but I got laid off in December, as many of my colleagues did. And while I was searching for what that next step might be, I went to my LinkedIn network, which is, I think, what some of us PR and social media specialists kind of do best. And I shared that I was open to new opportunities and let my network kind of work their magic. And something that's really interesting that happened is two startups that I worked with during my time at JetBlue immediately reached out to me and said, "Hey, you were great at JetBlue. We would love to bring you on as a fractional comms lead while you look for your next thing." And that wasn't something that I had ever really had on my radar previously. And I filed an LLC in the state of California just to make sure my bases were covered legally. And I started consulting with them pretty much right away. But what's really interesting is that when I started posting about that work, even more folks from my network with that need or folks that they knew were beginning to come to me now that they knew that this was an offering and something that I was open to doing. And so in April, about 4 months after I officially got laid off, I announced the brand of Mattina Media offering PR or really full service comms for VC firms and VC backed startups.
Oh my gosh, I love that you took a difficult situation but found a way to transform it into something really great that you've now built on your own, but also how cool that it turned into something that you didn't really see coming. Like you just had these previous clients reach out to you, and then next thing you know, you have a full company out of it.
Yeah, it was really crazy actually. My mom is like one of my biggest career mentors. She spent 35 years at Procter and Gamble, doing human resources. So that's kind of her, bread and butter. And she had always said, would you ever consider starting your own firm one day? And the answer was always no, no, no. And now here I am all these years later, having started my own firm, and it's one of the best jobs I've ever had is being my own boss. So I have great clients, and it's really awesome just to be able to have, my own schedule and things on my terms. So I'm really enjoying it.
Oh, absolutely. And what you shared about just turning to LinkedIn and just putting it out there like, hey, I'm looking for my next role. I think it's a really great reminder to us that all of us who are business owners or founders need to be more mindful of asking for things that we need. And I actually was just writing a post about this earlier today about the idea of if you don't ask, the answer is always no. And that kind of reminds me of your story. It's like you just put it out into the world, and now here you go.
Yeah.
You have clients coming in because you took that step to do so.
Exactly. And it was really amazing response from my network. Just again, one that I wasn't expecting at all. What's interesting is I have a friend, she and I both got laid off within months of each other last year. She opted not to share the news on LinkedIn that she was temporarily out of work because she wanted to use it as a negotiation or kind of a leverage tactic as she got to end stage interviews for the salary. And that's just not me. I love to kind of help my network where I can, and I'm really grateful that they were able to support me in the same way in return, but different strategies for everybody. But I will be the first to sing LinkedIn's praises as getting me to where I am today.
Oh, totally. And so once you got those two previous clients who then you started doing fractional work for, what was it like to now grow your firm? Because now you have, I believe, two people who are helping you and working with you. So, like, what was that like of being able to take things from zero to now be so busy and awesome what you're doing today?
Yeah, definitely a bit of trial by fire or drinking out of a fire hose, whatever metaphor you want to use. I started the business because I love comms and PR. I didn't start the business because I felt like I was an exceptional business owner or really felt like I knew what I was doing. One thing that was really helpful to me is at Edelman Smithfield, all of us, kind of mid senior level and above, are expected to help run the operations of the business. So I had already had a bit of back end experience with invoicing and tracking hours and how to structure retainers or do a new business proposal. Without that experience that I had at Edelman Smithfield, I would not, and I know this for a fact, be able to do the job today, or maybe I could have done the job, but it would have taken me a lot more time to get off the ground. So I really credit them for teaching me how to run an agency and how to run a business in that way. But at the end of the day, it doesn't always come naturally to promote myself or promote my brand or the good work that I'm doing for clients, because at the end of the day, it stops with me. And that's
Mhm.
a little scary, but also really fun at the same time. So I've gotten to the point where I've been able to scale. I have a few contractors supporting me, one that does graphic design, which often goes hand in hand with comms because blogs, newsletters, LinkedIn posts, they all need graphics. I also have my sister actually helps me with my invoicing and billing. That's my least favorite part of the job, quite frankly. It should be my favorite because it's payday, but tracking the hours, putting them into the invoices, sending them out, chasing people for payments. That's totally not my jam. So it really is Mattina Media Group now with my sister on board.
Mhm.
And then I was also able to bring on another junior PR hire that kind of helps me with those basic entry level tasks, which are media list research, version one of press releases, version one of maybe some LinkedIn copy. So it's been really exciting. I won't overinflate it. They're all part-time contractors. It's, a very small amount of their hours that they're doing, but it's cool to get that management and that leadership experience because at Edelman Smithfield, at JetBlue Ventures, I had direct reports. And that
Mhm.
is something that I really do enjoy is kind of bringing other people into the fold of PR and helping to teach them and train them. So I hope it's been as valuable for them in growing their careers as it has been for me to have help, quite frankly.
Totally. And I think it's really great that you had that, I guess, like transferable skills from like more of the admin stuff from your previous role to supporting you in what you do now, which is really great. And I hope that sometimes you take some time to like pause and think back and be like, wait a second, I never would have thought that I would be here like 10 months ago. Like, hopefully you take some time to
Yeah.
be proud of yourself and what you've done.
Yeah, thank you so much for saying that. I think as a business owner, and you could maybe relate to this, we're probably our own worst critics at
Mhm.
the end of the day. And so I do spend a lot of time thinking on how could I make this better or iterate. But timing wise, it was very serendipitous because I was laid off 2 weeks before my 30th birthday. There was like kind of no worse feeling in the world turning the
Mhm.
decade and feeling like I really didn't have a springboard for that next thing. I had never quit a job without having something else lined up after it. And so I found myself in this really unknown territory in a new decade, which, like, I don't know if you felt this way, but the shift from 29 to 30, I was like really wigging out about it for some reason. And so to then this year kind of be able to wade through that and come out on the other side, I've been able to breathe a sigh of relief, I guess is what I should say. It feels like all of the pieces sit together how they were supposed to, even if at the time I didn't have the crystal ball to see that that's how it would play out.
Yeah, absolutely. And also being able to, particularly like for me, I feel like I need to like actually see the numbers to feel good about what I've done. Like I need to have like something I can grasp on. But I hope the same for you, like thinking back about like all the press coverage you've gotten for your clients or how the LinkedIn posts that you've written for them have led to other opportunities or whatever it might be. Like I think I'm sure having stuff like that really helps to be like, okay, what I'm doing is working. I'm on the right path.
Yeah, definitely. So besides LinkedIn being my primary referral source, I would say it's definitely word of mouth. So the good work that I do with the clients I have begets other good work, which has been really fantastic.
Mhm.
I'm also involved in a few professional communities that are for folks specifically working in the VC startup world. And that's been really helpful to make connections as well, either to give other people advice, even if they're not looking to hire, but maybe that means I'm top of mind later when they do need to bring a partner on board to help them with something specific.
Absolutely. And on the topic of that, I'd love to hear from your perspective what the benefits are for a VC firm or a venture-backed startup for bringing on someone like yourself, like why they really need to prioritize their PR and comms.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll start on the VC side. I will say for both, though, the primary objective typically at the end of the day is that comms and PR can beget better fundraising opportunities. And that looks a little bit different for each. So on the VC side of the house, LPs are looking at your LinkedIn as part of their due diligence process, for example. So when I worked at Edelman Smithfield, every year they put out an annual LP survey that shows the value of communications. And over 95% of LPs globally told told Edelman that they are looking at not only a GP's LinkedIn, but the firm's LinkedIn as part of their due diligence process when they're deciding whether or not they want to make an investment decision in a new fund. And so, whether you've got crazy stuff on there, whether you've got nothing on there, or whether you've got a dedicated PR person and all of your buttons are in a row, the way that your online presence looks is a deciding factor for those GPs when they're making an allocation decision. That's on the owned side. On the earned media, that more PR lens, LPs are reading the top business trades every day, CNBC, Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg. And so it behooves these VC firms to get placements in those outlets that their current LPs or potential LPs are reading so that when they go to raise their next fund, they are top of mind as somebody that is credible, third party validated, I should say, credibility with the media. So on the VC front, it can really help with fundraising. Another goal of a lot of VCs that I work with or that I've spoken with is deal flow. Some of these VCs are in a very competitive space. I can't tell you how many, for example, climate tech funds there are out there, and all of their language reads the same. And so to really differentiate your firm for the next, besides showing returns, besides having a stellar lineup of your investment team, is differentiating your storytelling and what you're looking for. One firm I really like that does this super well is Lower Carbon Capital. They keep all of their comms in-house, which I think is a very interesting strategy, but they are not afraid to be bold. They are not afraid to be edgy. And it really, I think, has made them rise above the crowd in a sea of climate tech firms that are all looking for the same deals at the end of the day. That I think is a little bit more relevant for sector specific or smaller VCs who haven't yet established the brand visibility. Of course, every startup wants Andreessen or Sequoia on their cap table, but not every VC is or can be an Andreessen or a Sequoia at the end of the day. So that's the VC side. On the startup side of the house, also fundraising, but instead of their audience being LPs, it is the GPs of these VC firms. Is this enough
So
acronyms
many
yet?
acronyms.
I know. GP being general partner, LP being limited partner for those listening who might not be as familiar with the world of venture capital. And trust me, it took me a while to get the hang of all of this as well. So on the startup front, what they are looking for is to get a commitment from the venture firms to fund their latest round, pre-seed, seed, Series A, Series B. I've seen all the way up to Series E and F lately, given the current investing climate and the current climate of venture, which is really interesting. It's taking longer for these companies to mature and have an exit. So it helps them on the fundraising front. It also primarily helps drive customers because these fundraising cycles, depending on the startup, it can happen every 2, 3 years. Once they've got the capital, they're usually set for, a few years. And so comms and PR can help them differentiate above their competitors who are also typically startups and maybe haven't invested the money in this area to get really good at telling their story. And so what happens is the startup that invests the money and the time in a comms and PR hire see that their traction slowly ticks up over time past their competitors because they made the decision to invest early. I'm seeing this with one of my clients right now, really interesting. They have a primary competitor in the United States. I have been working with them for the last 6 months on owned content, thought leadership, LinkedIn posts, and their newsletters, as well as earned, getting them media placements as they roll out their product across the country. And one really interesting thing that the founder and I noticed together is their primary competitor is now hiring a copywriter. And we can read between the lines and
Oh.
see that they previously didn't have anybody helping them with this, but they now see that they have fallen behind because they didn't prioritize that comms or PR hire. So it's something I'm seeing play out in my own client portfolio every day. It's just cool to kind of have these real life examples to point back to.
Oh, yeah. And you just shared so many good benefits and reasons why it's important to, whether you're a venture-backed startup or a VC firm, have someone to support you with your PR and comms. And you brought up a really good point that I want to go deeper into, which is the combination of owned media and earned media. And so I wonder sometimes if you see if these startups and firms maybe prioritize one over the other, like don't, prioritize both at once, and why you think it's important to have both earned and owned.
Yeah, it definitely depends on the client. I will say that most of mine, probably 60 to 70% of my work is focused on owned content, where maybe 30% is focused on that traditional PR and media relations strategy. Both definitely important, but that is the kind of split I'm seeing within my own client portfolio. I think it depends on a lot of things. If you have founders that are risk averse, if you have investors that are risk averse, owned can feel a lot easier because you are controlling the narrative. You control exactly what words are going on the page, exactly what message are reaching your investors or your audience, versus in the world of earned media, it's up to the discretion of the reporter and how well you can verbally communicate your message to them in order to get a good piece in return. I also think there's been a bit more of a focus on owned tactics because the media landscape has really changed in the past few years. There's less reporters than ever to cover what feels like more news than ever because VCs and startups alike have started to catch on that this comms and brand building piece can really be the key differentiator in success versus not. And so it feels like there's more and more funding rounds being announced, new hires, new partnerships, and less reporters to cover them, quite frankly. So it's tough to break through the noise unless you're willing to be very patient. And I will say most founders are not willing to be very patient. And so sometimes we go the owned route for news because they need it out now, or a contract that they're about to sign. I just saw this today with one of my clients. They announced a new funding round, and what we were trying to do was land an exclusive in a VC or tech outlet. And the number was big. I felt like we had a good, compelling story of traction. but the founders were not willing to wait because they had two contracts up for renewal this week, and the new capital announcement had the potential to kind of sway what decisions those two employers made at the end of the day. So both very important. I think still that earned media is valued a little bit higher than the traction we get on owned, just anecdotally. Nobody's told me that, and I haven't dug into the specific data and compared across clients, but people really still do want that third party reporter validation, whether it's in trade outlets that cover their specific vertical or the tier one business outlets like the CNBCs, like the Wall Street Journals that I kind of talked about earlier.
Yeah. And I think that is really important to remember too, is you kind of like alluded to this, that it may be like a case by case situation if you go the owned versus earned route. And like you shared with your own client, where it was really important to get that news up quickly, and waiting for a reporter or journalist to cover that may not make the most sense in that situation. So I like that reminder of just
Yeah.
like kind of being able to pivot depending on your timeline and what your following goals are after that.
Yeah, because we can always typically get the coverage. It's just a matter of how are we framing the pitch, which reporter are we going after, and who is the target. It might not always be their top choice, but it is going to be something. However, it takes time. We're at the
Mhm.
mercy of the reporter's schedules. We're at the mercy of the reporter's editors. If they're, not interested in the story, it might be a moot point, even if the reporter is. So, lots of kind of different things to play with on the back end to make sure that they're ultimately happy with how their announcements have gone. But yeah, I would say most of my clients are focusing on that owned side right now, which is also great. But when you go to fundraise, that's typically when I see that uptick, and we'd like to have more traditional, quote unquote, traditional media hits.
Absolutely. And on the topic of media hits and coverage, I think a lot of people, once they get featured somewhere, they'll just like share it once and then don't realize you can do more than just that, just sharing it once on social media. And so,
No, such a,
so let's
I
talk
know
about
how you
that.
feel. I know how you feel about this. Huge no. I am a big believer in the communications flywheel or the communications umbrella, whatever works best. And so earned media is just one tiny piece of that flywheel or one tiny raindrop under that umbrella. And from there, you can turn it into many different pieces of content. So let's take my client that had the funding announcement this morning. Let's play this out. And this is what we did, by the way. So, number one, it gets earned media coverage the morning of. We were able to secure earned media coverage. It was just not the exclusive like we wanted it to be. Earned media coverage, that one article then becomes a post for the founders. There's two founders. So now we've got three pieces of content. Then it's a post for the company page. It's a blog on the company page. Their legal team shared it. Their investors shared it. And they continue to kind of do a drip campaign as the weeks go on to emphasize this funding. It was a newsletter this morning that went out to all of their customers and stakeholders. So there are kind of like endless ways to kind of pump that news faucet. It's something I'm trying to train my clients on now because the thought doesn't always come naturally to people that aren't in the day in and day out of communications. I have another client who recently presented at the Raise Global Summit in San Francisco this past Friday, which is designed for VC firms to connect and learn from one another. And she did a great LinkedIn post about it. And my comms light bulb was going off. And I'm like, do you have your deck? Because we could turn this into a blog about the topic that you taught everyone about, which then that blog can be used in our monthly newsletter, which can then be posted from our company account. So each thing kind of begets the other. And I think our role as the comms professionals is to make the pieces fit into a cohesive marketing campaign or story instead of, as one of my clients called it, random acts of marketing, kind of with no rhyme or reason.
Absolutely. And one, you just shared such good advice there in terms of like not only how you can repurpose one piece of content, but also like the different avenues you can pursue. And that's like one of the things that I always say. It's like the hill that I will die on basically is like, don't put all of your eggs in one basket. And I feel like that's a message that was like kind of underlying in what you were sharing there. Like, not just putting all of your eggs into just the startup basket, but like looping in the other stakeholders, like the legal team, um, and also the founders, and then also being able to have the VCs involved too. But then beyond that, being able to not focus only on just one LinkedIn post, but having the LinkedIn post, the blog, the newsletter, like there's so many different channels and outlets to pursue, which I think is so important. So I love that you shared that because it's like the more places you share to, the more people who share it as well, the better impact and better results you'll get.
Yeah. I had a client recently win a pretty prestigious award, a Hall of Fame award, in fact, that only 15 women get every year. We turned that into 6 different LinkedIn posts. The me of 4 or 5 years ago would have never thought to kind of prime the pump with that many posts about one award, but her network really responded. I capped just at 5 because I didn't want people to get kind of fatigued and feel like we were only posting about this award. But each post got upwards of 100, 200 likes, between 10 and 30 comments, which, given her engagement before she brought me on board, was really good for her. So it is pretty amazing how much the network, how much your audience really does respond to that kind of stuff. Even if you, as the founder, or maybe even the PR person, feels like, is this too much? Is this repetitive? That's where the discretion piece comes in.
Absolutely. And that's a really good reminder as well is that like just because you share something once doesn't mean people are going to see it. It's like I don't remember the exact stat, but it's something like we see 5,000 messages a day. So it's like if you read a post once, you might remember it, but you might not. So that's why it's so important to keep sharing that stuff over and over again so that people do pick up on it and so that they do kind of have it stick in their mind.
Yeah. And I have found that that owned content is the best for, at least on the startup side, bringing in some potential new customers. Because when you post thought leadership, you are quote unquote selling your brand in a way that doesn't feel like selling, right?
Mhm.
You're really just positioning yourself as an expert, which then leads other people to also believe and feel like you are the expert to then reach out versus a cold sales DM or cold sales email doesn't always have that same effect.
Totally. And that makes me wonder too, how does a founder or VC know when they need to bring someone in externally to support their PR and comms? Like sometimes they might be like almost have analysis paralysis where they're like, I don't even know where to start. What would you recommend to them for simply just getting started with it?
Yeah. So on the startup side, I would say typically, this is not always the case, big asterisk, startups that are pre-seed and seed, or maybe yet haven't found that product market fit, it's usually a little too early for comms. Me specifically, I like working with Series A, Series B startups. That's kind of my sweet spot. That is when I tend to see startups bring on a contractor or a consultant because they have the need and they're approaching that critical mass where the founders are a little bit too busy to keep doing it themselves, but they have a product and they have identified their target customers so that comms can really come in and do its job.
Mhm.
I will say Series C and beyond, even later stage Series B, quite frankly, you will see startups begin to hire folks in-house and how they choose to structure their team, whether it's all in-house, partially consultant, or all consultant, no in-house. But it's what I tend to see a little bit more often as they are in the later stage of their company is that they will have a dedicated comms hire or a small dedicated comms team. And then the consultancy parachutes in and parachutes out to help on really specific topics. Like that consultancy is only doing media relations or only doing LinkedIn so that the core comms team can kind of focus on the bigger picture. As far as VCs, I don't see a lot of emerging managers who are emerging manager can typically be defined as somebody that is raising their first fund or they're on fund one. They definitely need the support, but they typically don't have the capital and they typically don't have the bandwidth to manage a comms or PR person. So in that case, what I would recommend, now whether this is what I actually see in the market is a different story. What I'd recommend is that they bring on a consultant to help them announce portfolio investments or new fund, launches only.
Mhm.
And then as they start to get to fund two and fund three, that's typically when VCs kind of kick in and see the value of doing comms and PR, because at that point, they've got the whole investing thing under their belt. They've successfully raised a first fund. Maybe now they're on fund two. They've probably expanded their team by a person or two. So that GP, that general partner, isn't the only person managing a comms or PR consultant. So that's typically what I see. It's never a bad idea to bring in comms early. It's just how do you want to allocate the money that you have, and it doesn't feel as well spent with the earliest stages VCs and the earliest stages startups.
Totally. And on the VC side specifically, it reminds me of a tweet that I saw maybe a few days ago, but it's like the idea of VC firms becoming media companies for their portfolio
Yeah.
companies. And I think that in itself is just a big indicator of why bringing in a PR and comms expert is so important, because VCs not only need this thought leadership and spotlight on themselves, but also their portfolio companies. And so that's a huge plus.
Yeah, I saw the same post. Andreessen Horowitz definitely kicked off that trend of becoming not just a VC firm, but really a media engine. And one trend I'm seeing in venture capital more broadly is they're not just providing the money anymore like they were 15, 20 years ago, cutting the check, getting a board seat, and crossing their fingers. Now VCs have entire platform and operations teams, typically with someone dedicated to help manage the portfolio and help the portfolio scale so that the venture firm is ultimately more successful. And I started to dabble in that work a little bit when I was at JetBlue Ventures. But comms, HR, operations, admin, that all falls under the platform umbrella. And it's something I think startups are really looking for as they decide, if they're a competitive startup and they're able to be a little choosy about who's on their cap table. Of course, not all startups get that luxury. You're going to want a VC firm that can help support you through those funding announcements or through those more difficult moments. And comms is one of those platform offerings that I see more and more in the community.
Absolutely. And so, on that note, you could probably share two answers for both VC firms and venture backed startups. But what advice would you have for them generally with just being able to build a successful PR and comm strategy?
Yeah, definitely. I actually think my advice for both is kind of the same, and it is to be a little controversial. And I mean that very thoughtfully, which is that these founders, whether it's of a VC firm or whether it's of a startup, have a conviction that they can do this better than anybody else in their sector. That's why they did it. Nobody becomes a business owner or starts a company because they think that they can do it the same as everybody else. And so I see that in their personalities. I see it come through on calls and, intakes, but it tends to fall flat on LinkedIn or in their media interviews because they're too afraid to really be edgy and push the envelope. And I really think what makes people stand out these days is putting your stake in the ground and for what it is that you believe in and not being afraid to scare away the wrong people. Scare is a little intense of a verb, but not being afraid to kind of weed out the people that might not be for you, but you get so many more who do resonate with the messaging and the thesis that you have to offer. Additionally, it is also more fun for me as your PR person if you have an opinion, and it is way more fun for reporters to talk to you if you have an opinion that they haven't heard before, because everyone's just kind of going around saying the same thing. And kind of going back to, what we spoke about at the beginning of the conversation is if you are not differentiated in some way, you're never going to have that breakthrough moment with the crowd.
Absolutely. And I'm excited to hear your response to this question because I feel like you've shared so many good examples already. But if there was some person or company within tech that you would like to give a shout out to who's doing something really cool right now. So it could be a consultant, it could be a startup, it could be a VC firm. Who would that be and why?
Yeah. So I would love to shout out my own client. It is Homegrown, joinhomegrown.com. They provide financing for brick and mortar entrepreneurs. And their CEO and founder, Michael Davis, is one of the smartest people I have ever met, truly. And he really has a personal conviction for the business that he's building, the startup that he's scaling, because as a child, he watched his own parents open a brick and mortar storefront and, really have a tough time financing it. And they, as a family, are still feeling the repercussions of bank interest rate loans and, those financing opportunities that they had to take so many years ago in order for their dream to be successful. So, Homegrown is unique in that it provides flexible financing with no personal equity. So you're not putting your house on the line or your personal assets on the line to ever pay Homegrown back. And what makes them especially so fascinating to me, in addition to being a really cool company and a really amazing founder and CEO, is that they really, I think, are bringing communities together by financing these brick and mortar storefronts, right? Especially in this age of AI, there's been all kinds of opinions about AI all over the board. My personal feelings aside, it can be scary to a lot of this country. And I think what people are craving is that in-person connection. And so these restaurants, these coffee shops, these hair salons, these co-working spaces that Homegrown finances are really kind of the lifeblood of communities and neighborhoods that people really want to still be a part of, even in this age of, such rapidly advancing technology that can at times, be a little bit of an unknown question mark. So
Mhm.
they are my shout out, just because not only do I really love what they're doing, but they're really smart and they're doing it well.
Oh, I love that. That's a really good shout out. Sarah, this has been such a fun episode, and I feel like I could just keep chatting with you about all things PR
I
because there's
know.
so many things to cover. We'll have to do a part two sometime. But thank you so much for coming on this week's episode of Built and Backed. I would love to have you share with our listeners where they can find you online in case they'd like to connect.
Yes, so you can find me on LinkedIn, Sarah Mattina, and my website is mattinamediagroup.com. Mattina mediagroup.com.
Amazing. And I'll include those links in the show notes that our listeners can easily find you and connect with you from there. But thank you so much again for
Great.
being a guest today.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this.